everybody! Welcome back to my channel, and of course if you're new, then just welcome. So far on my channel, I've talked about the schools of literary criticism, the history and evolution of Disney Channel, and how to make some delicious deviled eggs. But now that I've introduced myself to all of you, these fun getting to know me videos, I think it's time I talk to you guys about something a little more serious. Ableism against people with autism. This wide range of lifelong complex spectrum disorders is characterized by challenges with social interaction, nonverbal communication, and repetitive and restricted behaviors and interests. In case you don't know, I myself have autism, more specifically Asperger's syndrome. So unfortunately, I have first-hand experience with systemic ableism. That is, institutions, policies, and societal values that instill prejudice and allow or even encourage discrimination against those on the autism spectrum. In wake of George Floyd's death last year and the Black Lives Matter protests that subsequently swept the nation, many heated conversations were had about systemic racism. Systemic ableism is just like that, but for people with disabilities. In this video, I'm only going to talk about systemic ableism as it relates to those on the autism spectrum, because systemic ableism against mobility aid users and the blind and deaf are going to get videos of their own. In this video essay, I'm going to explain 4 different examples of systemic ableism against people with autism, including my own experiences with them. A stereotype is a preconceived notion, either positive or negative, about people of a certain gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or, of course, disability. And sadly, there are many rampant stereotypes about people with autism. Probably the most prominent among these are model minority myths, like that people with autism are really good at math and are super geniuses and savants. Now, what's wrong with these assumptions if they cast people with autism in a positive light? Well, see, when it comes to stereotypes, these positive stereotypes are ways in which the dominant group, in this case neurotypicals, expect the marginalized group, the autistics, to compensate for the negative stereotypes about them. Generally assumed that people like me are uncultured swines who don't know how to socially conduct themselves, they're psychologically immature, they can't handle a lot of responsibility, and are unhireable, which makes us worth less than our neurotypical counterparts. But those of us who are savants, get straight A's, and end up striking it rich via our special interests are just a little bit more likely to be viewed and treated on par with the non-autistic. Which even that's not to say that they always are. But either way, what happens when someone on the spectrum isn't at the top of their class or doesn't work in a field where they can be considered professional? Another commonly believed myth about autism is that boys are significantly more likely to have it than girls. What is there about boys' brains that makes them more likely to be so different in this way? Nothing. Because gender's a social construct, not a biological one. Behaviors commonly associated with the male and female genders are not the result of their genetics, but a result of growing up in a social scene that prescribes these norms. It's because of this that, oftentimes, the parents of little boys know something's up when they notice their son's first symptoms, so they take him to a doctor right away. But when their daughter does the same thing, they brush it off thinking of it as cute or a girl thing. This leads to an even greater problem of females on the spectrum receiving either a late diagnosis or no diagnosis at all, because traditional gender roles and norms pressure girls and women to mask autism-like symptoms and behavior more than they pressure boys and men to. And because of this societal pressure, that's what they end up doing. in order to not look autistic, which is going to lead me to my next point. Whenever I tell someone that I have autism, the first thing I hear is always something along the lines of, "Oh, well, you seem so normal that I never would have guessed." And in some cases they say, "I know or am related to someone who has autism and you're nothing like them. They're totally crazy," or "they do this or that," or "they can't even do this or that." And this also happens to a lot of my friends who are on the spectrum, particularly when they're on the high functioning end. When people say this, they think they're giving a compliment, but really what they're saying is, "You don't fit my preconceived notion of what someone with autism looks or acts like." It's been said many times that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And it's true. No two people on the spectrum are exactly alike. I mean, why else would it be called a spectrum? As I've mentioned, I have a lot of friends and family members who also have autism. I struggle with things that they have no problem with, and also vice versa. So you know the organization Autism Speaks? If you don't, they're essentially the PETA of autism organizations. Not one member of the board is autistic themselves, and only 4% of the money they make goes to help people with autism and their families. Where does the rest go? It goes towards cures for the supposed disease. This is probably one of the most public and notable examples of cure culture when it comes to autism. Most of the time, when neurotypicals speak on our behalf, they do so with pity and sorrow that we have this horrible problem that needs to be solved. Some parents have even gone so far as to try to cure their autistic children with chelation therapy, or feeding them chemicals to flush the system of any substance thought to cause autism, most of which have been proven not to. This method has been proven time and time again to not work, and in some cases can be harmful or even deadly. In my opinion, chelation therapy on children with autism is akin to putting LGBT people through conversion therapy. It doesn't work. It hurts them rather than helping them, and most importantly, it's an attempt to fix someone who isn't broken. That's right, people with autism are not broken. No more than is someone broken by virtue of being LGBT or by virtue of being of a certain race or ethnicity. Part of the idea behind chelation therapy is the myth that the thimerosal originally present in the MMR vaccine caused autism, and chelation therapy would get it out. This myth about the vaccine, that the MMR vaccine causes autism, has been proven so many times in so many different studies to not be true. Not only that, but it perpetuates autism's social stigma. The diseases this vaccine guards against, measles, mumps, and rubella, can literally kill someone. Autism will not. You could argue that even if autism doesn't kill, it can make life harder for these individuals. It's not having autism that makes things harder for them. What it is that the world is so unaccommodating and the world thinks so little of these people. So the idea that the vaccine causes autism and therefore you should not get it for your child spreads the idea that it is better to risk letting your child die of a fatal disease than have a brain that works differently. At the end of the day, the brain is a diverse human organ that is not meant to come only in one form, the neurotypical one that's considered the default. The autistic brain is just another one of the different brain structures that are supposed to exist. To suggest that autistic behaviors are an illness that needs to be cured and not merely a different way of thinking and doing things reinforces the negative stereotypes I mentioned earlier and furthers the social stigma around autism, which encourages second-class treatment of such individuals. Cure culture advocates usually argue with someone like me by saying something like,
"Well, of course you don't want a cure. You're so high functioning."
What these people usually mean by this
is that who needs this so-called cure is people with nonverbal autism. What this suggests is that spoken words are the only viable form of communication, which is both incredibly ableist and just not true. I forget this exact quote, but I've heard this saying multiple times that's something along the lines of, just because a child can't speak doesn't mean they have nothing to say. And I couldn't agree with this more. I can only assume that someone who thinks otherwise has a similar prejudice against the deaf who use sign language to communicate. I once had a friend who'd spent time working with the deaf, and she told me that members of the deaf community don't think of themselves as having an affliction or handicap. Rather, they live in a world that is without sound or hearing. Similarly, for people with autism, their world is one in which only a certain extent of sensory stimuli is tolerable. There is no one set of social norms to abide by, and in the case of nonverbal individuals, a world where everyone talks except them. Even telling someone to not let their autism define them, however well-intentioned, is quite ableist, because my autism does define me. That is, it shapes everything from my personality to my experience in life, my interests, my hopes, dreams, thoughts, and visions. If I were to be cured of my autism, I wouldn't be Laura anymore. I don't know what I'd be.
And those are just the thoughts and beliefs held by our society, which it conditions individuals to have. In the next part of this video essay, I'm going to discuss the ways in which these beliefs are actually put into practice and the ways in which they actually discriminate against and make life harder for people with autism. So tune in next time for the continuation of this video as I discuss even more present and extreme examples. Bye!